Mr. McCourt, does the state care to give an opening statement? Ms. Kipke.
21, 13, 4, 4, 3. What do these numbers mean? First, they correspond to concrete facts that you will hear during the course of this trial. Second, they are constants that help bring meaning to chaos. Late the evening of September 12, 2015, going into the early morning hours of September 13, 2015, there was an event that was held at the Cloud9 Club on 441. Hundreds attended this event. The club was packed. At times, there was a line of people waiting to get inside. The people that went to Cloud9 included people that were longtime residents of Ocala, Marion County. People that were former residents of Ocala and Marion County and had come back into town. And some that happened to be in town that night and ended up at the club. Many of the witnesses that you will hear during the course of this trial were there that night. They will tell you what they saw, what they heard, what they experienced from their own unique individual perspectives at Cloud9 that night. One person you will not hear from that was there that night, but you will hear about, is Benitria Robinson. Benitria was 19 years old. She went to the Cloud9 that night with one of her friends. She was seen inside by many people that were familiar with her, knew her growing up in Marion County. She had her photo taken by a professional photographer that had a photo booth set up inside the club. Benitria was killed in the early morning hours of September 13th, 2015, after she was shot in the head and the back. Tamia Wadley also went to Cloud9 that night with some friends. She saw Benitria there that night. Benitria, she knew from growing up. They actually played basketball growing up against each other in high school and in college. Miss Wadley was shot in the leg in the early morning hours of September 13th, 2015. Davenus Blunt only went to Cloud9 because his girlfriend at the time wanted to go and meet up with some of her girlfriends. Mr. Blunt was also shot in the leg in the early morning hours of September 13th, 2015. Dontarius Bartley went to Cloud9 that night as well. He was shot in the abdomen in the early morning hours of September 13th of 2015. Nathaniel Kendrick decided to go to Cloud9 that night. He wanted to get out of the house. He wanted to go out. Once he arrived at the club and went inside, he noticed that his sister, Danielle Kendrick, was inside. Danielle Kendrick had gone to Cloud9 that night with her friend, Ebony Yeomans. Mr. Kendrick was shot in the early morning hours of September 13th, 2015. You will hear from witnesses their belief that the bullet went through his body and ended up in his sister's body, where it's still located today, near her spine. Laquan Barrow, Michael Smith, and Gary King were all at Cloud9 that night. You will hear about altercations that occurred inside the club that night. You will hear that fights broke out between Danielle Kendrick and Maisha Barrow, who is the defendant Laquan Barrow's sister. Witnesses will tell you that once the females started fighting, that eventually the two brothers, Nathaniel Kendrick and Laquan Barrow, got involved. Witnesses will tell you they saw Gary King amongst the group inside as well. Laquan Barrow and Gary King are cousins. Eventually, a group of people, including Danielle Kendrick, Maisha Barrow, Laquan Barrow, and Gary King are ejected from the club by the security that was working there that night. Once this group is outside the front of the club, fights flare up again. Laquan Barrow is angry. He is seen pacing back and forth in front of the club. Attempts are made by various people to get people to leave, to calm down. People start recording what is happening outside of the club on their cell phones. Shortly after, Nathaniel Kendrick exits the club as well, and eventually you will hear Mr. Kendrick and Mr. Barrow are exchanging words with each other. The two clearly appear ready and wanting to fight. Then chaos breaks out. A couple of 100 feet north of the club, several officers of the Ocala Police Department were in the middle of conducting a traffic stop. It was relatively calm early morning until just after 1:30 a.m. when multiple shots rang out. The OPD officers heard these shots, and two of them immediately ran towards Cloud 9. Officer David Rodriguez ran towards the back area of the club. He saw people running in all different directions. He sees people leaving the back entrance of the club. He's yelling at everyone, trying to bring some order to the chaos that's going on there. He's asking people to show their hands. He's trying to locate anybody that has a firearm. Officers are being dispatched from both the Ocala Police Department and the Marion County Sheriff's Department. You will hear that the Cloud 9 Club and its parking lot have a very unique jurisdictional fact. Part of it is located within city jurisdiction, and part of it is located within the county jurisdiction. Some officers are closer to this location than others. One of them, Richard Chuck, he works with the Ocala Police Department, was one amongst a group of OPD officers that happened to be just right at the downtown square. He gets into his patrol vehicle when he hears the call out for shots around that area and races to the Cloud 9 Club. He parks his patrol vehicle right in front of the club. He gets out and he races to a female who's lying on the ground on the sidewalk right out in front of the club, right near the street. She's surrounded by people. He checks for a pulse, detects one, notes that there's blood in her mouth. He turns her on her side. He hears her gasp for air. He starts to administer first aid. He makes preparations to perform CPR. He notices what appears to be a gunshot wound to her head. He starts performing CPR on her. Eventually, another officer takes over for him. Eventually, EMS shows up and takes over for him. Female is pronounced dead on the scene. That was Benitria Robinson. Other OPD officers and crime scene technicians are arriving, all amongst all this going on. Officers are finding and marking areas where they see gun shell casings. Photographs are being taken of the scene. Photographs are being taken of the various people still outside the club, including other people that had been injured by being shot. Marion County Sheriff's Department personnel start showing up on scene as well. Tag numbers are being relayed to officers. Car descriptions are being given to officers. Cars are being pursued by officers. Injured are being transported to the hospital, both by other patrons that were there that night and by ambulance. More people are starting to show up, gather around, and watch. Law enforcement responds to the hospital to try to and attempt to speak to the various people that were injured. 21 shell casings are recovered by the Marion County Sheriff's Office in the parking lot of the Cloud 9 Club. It's right on the side of the club. Analysis of those casings reveals that they come from 3 different firearms. 13 from one, 4 from another, and 4 from a third. In various interviews of witnesses, Laquan Barrow's name keeps coming up. Multiple witnesses see him in possession of a gun that early morning. Multiple witnesses identify him as a shooter. Multiple witnesses see Michael Smith in possession of a firearm that early morning. Multiple witnesses identify him as a shooter. Witnesses also see Gary King in a possession of a firearm that early morning. Witnesses identify him as a shooter as well. Witnesses that were there identify these 3 men, the defendants in this case, as the ones that shot into a crowd of people that were leaving the Cloud 9 Club that early morning of September 13th, 2015. Accounts of these witnesses are anticipated to have their differences, but they share one very important commonality: the identification of one or more of these 3 defendants as shooters in this case. Members of the jury, over the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear from various witnesses that will give you pieces of a puzzle. Some of these witnesses you will hear from were shot. Some of these witnesses you will hear from were friends of those that were shot. Some of these witnesses were working at the club in some capacity that night. Some of these witnesses you will hear from don't really know anyone involved at all. You will hear from law enforcement that collected evidence, law enforcement and EMS that tended to the injured, law enforcement that interviewed people, analysts that processed evidence. You will see videos, you will see photographs. By the end of this trial, you will have heard enough evidence to conclude, beyond a reasonable doubt, that these 3 men are guilty of the murder of Benitria Robinson, and that Laquan Barrow and Michael Smith are guilty of the attempted murders of 5 other people, and that Gary King is guilty of the attempted murder of 4 other people. Thank you.